Napping is nothing more than a competitive hobby for these lumbering protectors of nature. Easily sleeping for months or even years at a time, it's a friend to all of nature, but a dangerous enemy to those who cross it. The Treant is a special creature with some great abilities and lore, and in today's video I'm going to show you just how much your players will regret deforestation support in their own game. Today's video is none other than how to Treant. So, first things first. There is plenty of lore and information that the 5th edition Treant provides right out of the monster manual, but I try not to explore too deeply into the lore of the monster, so I can focus more on the combat potential, emphasizing other ways you can shake up the encounters with the how-to monsters. With that being said, the Treant has some great combat potential to first break into. First up is its biggest contender of a TPK, which is its Animate Trees ability. Now, technically, this ability comes with a few special conditions. The first few hiccups are the ways to disable or dispel it outright. If you manage to kite the new animated trees too far away from the Treant, if you kill the Treant, or if you convince the Treant to dispel them naturally, those are the weaknesses that come to mind. Each of these make the animated trees return to their normal forms. But from a pure numbers perspective, and more so from the eyes of players who don't specifically know these weaknesses, this ability is absolutely bonkers. First up, each of the trees has a stat block almost identical to the Treant itself, including the massive 138 average HP, and the powerful Slam multi-attack, each dealing 3d6 plus 6 damage each. This all but triples its damage output and its health from a pure numbers perspective. It's only an action to do this ability, and it lasts all day. It could easily be done before or during combat without much penalty. But by knowing that, you can imagine that most players and game masters see it that way. And my goal here is to keep you on your toes by giving you strange and tactical suggestions to keep your players at high anxiety every single fight, even if it's just versus a couple of trees. There is a very weird ability that the Treants get that is explained super well by the YouTuber Mr. Rex. You should go check out his videos. He does lore and secrets about all sorts of monsters and creatures. But this ability is their ability to talk to trees. And even if this ability isn't the fastest form of communication, that includes trees in an area of battle. Trees that witness players doing something in the forest they probably shouldn't be doing. Now, I say this is a weird ability because this can provide you as the game master a perfect platform in which to introduce a Treant at any time. If they have a knack for slinging fireballs or disrespecting the creatures in protected areas of the forest, it's just inevitable that the guardian of that forest would come by to knock their heads together. But even more so on the same point is the fact that the Treants have great memory. They may remember a transgression for as long as the players are alive. They may even be holding a grudge based on something their descendants did, and barring them from the forest at all time. This is a great story hook, as you can introduce them at any point for practically any reason you can think of, but even more so, this kind of bleeds into my next topic that's just as important. The Treant is a creature with pretty high wisdom. At a 16, I would say that its lack of skills is more of a testament to 5th edition being simplistic rather than it not earning them outright. The Treant should have bonuses to nature and insight, in my opinion. It should allow them to be able to talk and protect the people and creatures of the forest a bit better without being tricked so easily. They're supposed to be ancient and wise. They're supposed to be insightful and overall knowledgeable. But without those skills, it doesn't really represent that they have that. But because the Treant has no bonuses to its skills, and such mild mental stats, I doubt it's going to be talking to someone that offends it or damages its home for very long or very politely. Next up, I want to talk about the Treant's actual attacks, and more so, my love for throwing rocks. So technically there isn't a reason why the rocks are so good, but come on, throwing a boulder at that warlock that just spams Eldritch Blast is just something so satisfying I can't really explain it. For damage though, the Treant is better off getting into melee and bashing skulls in, but the rocks are a good option all the time. I truly believe beefcakes like this one are really better off in melee, especially with that resistance to bludgeoning and piercing. But if they can't close that distance, or are in fear of specifically a fire axe, well, my answer is going to include throw rocks at it until it stops moving. Something else I find interesting about their combat is the false appearance ability, which if used offensively, could get the players close enough to it for it to get a sneak attack round. Although, I doubt this would actually work since it's so slow and clumsy with that 8 dexterity. But I can be hopeful nonetheless. This is kind of compounded by the lack of real bait. What would actually draw the players closer to a specific tree or location without the threat revealing itself? Especially considering the Treant's intelligence is only 12. I can't think that it's going to be outsmarting a group of perceptive players very often to get that first vital strike with such a low dexterity. Their other hidden feature is their coordination and symbiosis with nature itself, relying on small creatures to help it stay healthy while it sleeps, and protecting them in turn. It could be said that the animals of the forest are under its command in a loose way. It doesn't have a clear talk to animals on its 5th edition sheet, but its intent and feeling can be communicated to these creatures outright. It could be assumed that the Treant could turn the wild beasts and plants in the area against the party if you find a Treant powerful enough. Speaking of, powerful nature magic is originally what animates the tree. I would actually say that giving the Treant spells and magical abilities is way within your rights as a dungeon master. Just make sure not to go overboard with it, without understanding how much your party can reasonably take on in a fight. Spells like Healing Word, Plant Growth, Earthbind, and Spike Growth come to mind. I like the Treant being able to lock players in place, but since its action economy is really bad without any reactions or bonus actions, spells like Healing Word are a good way to flush out its turns fully, to get all of the power of the multi-attack, and to top off its massive HP pool. But even with that huge HP bar, they have a massive weakness to fire, which does make a lot of sense. They are a literal tree. However, you can use this to your advantage a little bit. If the players do spam fire spells and manage to conflagurate the Treant, why not have the slam attacks deal fire damage as well? Another thing to note about the Treant is the specific resistance to bludgeoning and piercing. It doesn't matter how powerful their magic weapons are if they have those damage types, because it still resists them. This makes them especially good against ranged attacks and rogues specifically. Sometimes even fighters, depending on what type of weapon it is. But, on the same hand, this makes their worst enemies spellcasters by a mile. Especially sorcerers and wizards. Because most of the time they'll actually have fire spells just at the ready. So maybe, when you're deciding on how your Treant is going to approach these parties, keep in mind how many spellcasters actually have fire spells. Its intelligence isn't that impressive. But maybe it could parlay the group into meeting it by a river, or approach them in terms of peace if it cannot best them outright. Again, its wisdom is high enough to understand if a fight is too far out of its reach. If it can't take on a fight, it may try diplomacy, even if it's not really smart enough to really set up a trap. As for terrain, you can imagine the Treant anywhere with an abundance of trees, whether it be a mountainside cliff, a waterfall, a dark forest, or somewhere more strange like an oasis in a desert. Oh, make sure to check out the Oasis Treant from Kobold Press, Tome of Foes Volume 1. That Treant's pretty cool. But the terrain is going to make a very big difference in the way the Treant fights. It may be more or less willing to allow collateral damage, especially when it comes to fire, possibly tanking attacks on purpose that would otherwise destroy its home that it was originally designed to protect. I would also like to mention that the Treant isn't exclusively designed as a solitary creature. Although implied that the number of treants in one area can't really be that high in one given era, there could be 2 or more treants somewhere very easily. They could even come together from different locations and stop threats as a team, especially when it comes to players that are extremely dangerous to nature. But you have to remember that this is a very difficult encounter with one of them. But 2 CR9 creatures is a massive amount of XP for players if they manage to win that fight. Overall, the Treant is a mighty monster that brings new danger to life when your players get a little too reckless in the domain of nature around themselves. Look, the Treant is strange. It's humble and sleepy. It's content with napping and brewing strange potions in its free time, as long as its home is safe. But they make for terrifying encounters if the Game Master plays the strings of fate correctly. Because making one of these things mad isn't as hard as it seems, and they can easily TPK a party without proper knowledge or information. This one was really fun to make. I love the Treants so much. Seeing them on the screen in Lord of the Rings, or even representations of them like characters like Groot in Guardians of the Galaxy, made my childhood. Some of my oldest encounters with these made my players terrified of trees for days and days afterwards. And honestly, I couldn't blame them. If a tree just steps out of the forest and starts hurling boulders at you, and you close in melee and they just slap you for 3d6 plus 6 twice, yeah, of course you're going to be afraid of that for a while. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe and check out my other content around the channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you around.
If streaming games, playing D&D, talking about all things nerdy, and even embarrassing myself on live is good enough for you, well, maybe check out my content. And thanks for watching this one. I really appreciate it. If you need to find me, go ahead and look at my links down below, and maybe check out some of my other videos on TikTok and Twitch.